Hello everyone, welcome to Study Capital YouTube platform. So in the last few videos that we had on English literature, we were discussing some questions and we are continuing with that. You can see the first question on the screen. It is related to a work that is Observations in the Art of English Poesy. And the question is, who published Observations in the Art of English Poesy against the vulgar and unartificial custom of rhyming in favor of rhymeless verse on the model of classical quantitative verse? This is the question. As you might be knowing about the Elizabethan era or era after that, the discussion about the rhyme was too much there. Like if you know Philip Sidney, if you know Dryden, they all have talked about whether we should use rhyme in literature or in poetry or not. Before that, even before Chaucer, there was, most of the writings they were in blank verse or hexasyllabic meters. But when they started writing in rhyme, when blank verse came into being in England for that matter, like the first translations of Virgil's Aeneid Part 2, that is done by Earl of Surrey, Henry Howard. That is how blank verse came into being in England for the first time in 1560s. After that, discussions about rhyme, whether we should use it in poetry or not. Like Philip Sidney said, it is not necessary, but it is desirable. When you read Dryden, for that matter, Dryden wrote Essay on Dramatic Poesy in 1668. There he said that we should use rhyme, it is necessity, right? Now, so this question basically talking about a work that is Observations in the Art of English Poesy. A great discussions has been done on whether we should use rhyme or not during the Elizabethan era as well. And this work, Observations in the Art of English Poesy, it is actually written against the vulgar and unartificial custom of rhyming. So this writer is basically not in favor of rhyming, rather it is in favor of rhymeless verse on the model of classical quantitative verse. As I've told you before, Chaucer and Chaucer era, most of the writings you will find they are rhymeless. So this is also the same thing. It is written in favor of rhymeless verse, and it is calling the rhyming as unartificial and vulgar. The name of the work is Observations in the Art of English Poesy. This is the question. Options are Philip Sidney, Philip Roster, Thomas Campion and Samuel Daniel. You can see all these writers, they are writing during the time frame of Renaissance, especially in the Elizabethan time frame. As I said, Philip Sidney, when he wrote this very famous work called Apology of Poetry, there he mentioned that it is not necessary but it is desirable because it adds harmony to your writing about the rhyme. So the right answer here is Thomas Campion. Let's discuss a little bit about this particular text. This is against the vulgar and unartificial custom of rhyming and favor of model of classical quantitative verse. And this theory is actually criticized by another person, Samuel Daniel. This person is famous for writing sonnet sequence. In Elizabethan time frame, there were so many sonnet sequence came into being, like the first one, that is Astrophel and Stella, written by Philip Sidney. After that, Spencer Samoriti came, Drayton's ideas came, and Samuel Daniel also wrote some of the sonnet sequences during that time frame. And he actually criticized this particular work and wrote a work called Defense of Rhyme. So here he is defending rhyme, and this person, he criticized the use of rhyme in his work called Observations in the Art of English Poesy. Very important. They may ask you in your examination. Second question is, who gave the queen this quatrain on one of her progresses? Quatrain simply means 4-line stanza. As you know, English sonnets were introduced by Earl of Surrey. He changed the structure and he divided it into 3 quatrains, and then we have concluding couplet. So this is one of the quatrains attributed to Queen Elizabeth. I was promised on a time to have a reason for my rhyme. From that time unto this season, I received nor rhyme nor reason. This is a quatrain which is dedicated, which is actually written for Queen Elizabeth, and this is the options are Philip Sidney, Walter Raleigh, William Shakespeare, or Edmund Spenser. Walter Raleigh was the person who was very close to Queen Elizabeth, and he introduced Spencer to Queen Elizabeth, and she was very impressed, and she promised him that he will be getting certain money like a courtier, right, like a court poet. But after some time, when he didn't get that money, he wrote this particular quatrain to Queen Elizabeth, and later on he was provided with the money. So that is the answer. Thomas Fuller, who wrote in Worthies of England, where there is an story that is written there, and it is a, it is believed that this is the thing that happened, where the Queen told her treasurer, that is William Cecil, to pay Spencer £100 for his poetry. She liked the poetry, and that's why she asked William Cecil to give £100 uh, to Spencer. He objected that the sum was too much. He said that it's not, what Spencer is worthy. Then Queen Elizabeth said, then give him what is reason. But it was not paid, and without receiving his payment in due time, he again wrote this to tell her about the issues, right? And after that, he was given the £100 that it was promised to him. Another question is related to a movement. As you know, there are so many clubs and societies in English literature. This is related to 16th century society. The question is, which of the following is a proposed 16th century society or club dedicated to the reformation of English poetry and may have involved figures such as Spencer, Harvey, Edward Dyer, or Sir Philip Sidney? You can see again, Philip Sidney is a Elizabethan writer. Edmund Spencer is again an Elizabeth writer. They may sound, strange to you because they're not that famous. Now options are Kit Kat Club, Scribblers Club, Areopagus, and Pantisocracy. You can see these two clubs, they are from 17th century. This is especially, you will find this, there are some writers who are writing in the early part of 18th century as well. Pantisocracy is a kind of utopian society that Saudi and people like Coleridge, they have decided to create, but it was also a failed plan. So the right answer here is Areopagus. As you can see, this is a proposed society or club which is dedicated to the reformation of poetry. There may have been people like Spencer, Harvey, Dyer, and Philip Sidney involved in this particular club. The existence of it as a formal society was actually noted by a person called Foxbourne, Henry Foxbourne, in 1862 when he wrote his memoir of Sir Philip Sidney. He is a biographer of Philip Sidney, and there he mentioned this thing, but there is no direct evidence that whether this group actually, it was working during that time frame or not, but it is there in history. Okay, another question. Samuel Richardson, one of the founding figures of novel in England. There are four pillars, four wheels of English novels: Richardson, Fielding, Sterne, and Smollett. Richardson was one of the first person who wrote this novel called Pameela, which is considered as one of the first novels of English literature. Now the question is, his heroine of Pameela, that is Pameela, or Virtue Rewarded. The question is, the he named the heroine of his novel Pameela or Virtue Rewarded after किसने पहले ही ये create किया था? कौन ऐसा writer है who has already created this character called Pameela, who is actually a heroine in his Pameela or Virtue Rewarded? Options are Sidney's Pameela, Spencer's Pameela, Shakespeare's Pameela, or none of these. So basically, Philip Sidney wrote this work called Arcadia. Arcadia is very famous pastoral romance written by Philip Sidney, and it contains the earliest known use of this name called Pameela. So this character Pameela is actually created by Sidney before it is created by very famous novel as well, Pameela by Richardson. It is written in epistolary form like a letter and became very famous. Why this question? Because few years back they have asked very similar question related to this. It is a character called Colin Clout. So Colin Clout Comes Home Again is a poem written by Spencer. It's very famous when he visited Ireland for some missionaries work. And this character Colin Clout, who is a shepherd, is not used for the very first time by Spencer. Rather, there is another writer who is known as British Chaucerian, Skelton. You might be knowing if you have read about Magnificence, his work which is known as the first secular morality play. He is the same person who created this character called Colin Clout for the first time. तो ऐसे questions आपके एग्जाम में आते रहे हैं. So you have to remember that Pamela is a very famous novel written by Richardson, but this character has already been the name has already been used by Philip Sidney in his The Arcadia. Then Samuel Daniel, again an important writer, sonnet sequence writer during the time frame of Elizabethan era, and he wrote the Queen's Arcadia. Okay, the next question is, Who among the following, after watching the performance of William Shakespeare, Shakespeare's play, A Midsummer Night's Dream? It's very, one of the very famous plays written by Shakespeare. He observed that it is the most insipid, ridiculous play that I have saw in my life. You can see this is a harsh criticism of Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream. The options are John Evelyn, Samuel Pepys, John Dryden, and Robert Greene. You might be knowing about Robert Greene. He is a university wits, one of the university wits, and he is famous because he is the first critic of Shakespeare as well. He said, Shakespeare is an upstart crow. Roaming around our feathers, so he's using our feathers and he's being famous. You know how Shakespeare imitated things from university wits. अगर university wits नहीं होते तो Shakespeare नहीं होता, because all the things that university wits have written, Shakespeare have imitated something from all the 7 writers that you have in university wits. Robert Greene was the first critic, but this quote is actually coming from a diary. If you know the Restoration era, in the beginning of Restoration era, there were 2 diary writers, and in your examination they are asking questions from diary entries as well. This is one of the diary entry by a person called Samuel Pipi. Samuel Pipi is a diary writer during the time frame of Restoration era. You will find he was active between 1660 to 1669. So many things happened between it, like the plague came there, as well as there was a war going on with Holland, and there was a Great Fire of London also took place in the same time frame, and you'll find all the entries in his diary. So he wrote about 2 plays, not about the Midsummer Night's Dream as we have seen in the question, but he also talked about Romeo and Juliet. So again, a very famous work by Shakespeare, and he wrote about it that it is a play of itself the worst that I have that ever I heard in my life. Is criticizing, and the worst acted that ever I saw these people do. This is for uh, you know uh, Romeo and Juliet. And then he talking about Midsummer Night's Dream, as we have seen in the question, he called it as a ridiculous play that I ever saw in my life. So Pippi, in his diary entry, he talked about 2 works by Shakespeare and he criticized both of them. The one is Romeo and Juliet, for which he said that it is the worst that he ever heard of it, and A Midsummer Night's Dream, for which he said it is a ridiculous play that I have ever saw in my life. Okay, so the next question is Thomas Rymer. He coined the term poetic justice. There are 2 terms, poetic license, and there is another, that is poetic justice. Poetic license is a term which is coined by Horace, a Roman critic, Roman writer, is very famous for writing odes. There is a name called satire based on his name as well, light satire, and this that person, Horace, also coined a term called poetic license. A liberty that has been given to the writers so that they can coin words, they can arrange rhyme accordingly for the entertainment purpose, for the purpose of their writing. This is different term. This is not license. This is poetic justice. And Thomas Rymer coined this term to imply what? This is the question basically. These are the 5 options. The first thing is the distribution of earthly rewards and punishments in proportion to the virtue or vice of the various characters. Another option is literary work governed by decorum and morality. Third is literary work guided by random ways things often work out in the actual world. The fourth option is the metaphysical nature of poetic experience. The fifth one is the justification of poetry to be an integral part of the ideal republic. Plato wrote Republic, where he was talking about the ideal society. The right option here is basically poetic justice is like giving, if your hero is a good person, at the end of the play he should be rewarded. If he is a bad person, he should be given punishment. That is what poetic justice is. As you can see, the term, it defines itself. So the first option is the distribution of earthly rewards, right? What you are doing, you will be rewarded according to that. If you are a good person, you will be rewarded at the end of it. If you are a bad person, you will be getting punishment. You can see this thing in Shakespearean play as well, very rightly pointed out by Shakespeare. Another option, literary work governed by decorum and morality. So if a person is good, he is being rewarded. If he is bad, he is being punished. This is what morality is, right? So all first and 2, they are right answers, options. So A and B would be the right answer here. Okay. The poetic justice, which is also known as poetic irony, a literary device, which means actually ultimately virtue is rewarded and misdeeds are punished. He coined this term in his work called Tragedies of the Last Age Considered in 1678, the time frame of Restoration era. Philip Sidney, in Defense of Poesy, a very important work. It is very important for your examination. Philip Sidney's work, he argued that poetic justice was, in fact, the reason that fiction should be allowed in a civilized nation. He didn't use the term poetic justice directly, but he talked about it that in fact, the reason that fiction should be allowed in a civilized nation. Why this is important? Morality in general was very important for all the writers that you will find. You may be knowing about art for life's sake. These concepts were there in history throughout literature. Another question: who wrote a fictional biography of William Shakespeare with the title Nothing Like the Sun, a story of Shakespeare's love life? शेक्सपियर की कई सारे वर्क्स को रीइंटरप्रेट किया गया है, अलग अलग पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से लिखा गया है. टेम्पेस्ट को जितने भी वर्क्स हैं शेक्सपियर की, कई सारी रीटेलिंग्स आती हैं, बट दिस इज अबाउट शेक्सपियर हिमसेल्फ, राइट? देयर इज अ फिक्शनल बायोग्राफी ऑफ शेक्सपियर, बट व्हेन आई से फिक्शनल बायोग्राफी, दैट मींस the thing that you find in the postmodern era, fiction as well as the reality. When those things are merged, it is called at that faction. This is a fictional biography with the title Nothing Like the Sun. This is actually written by Ian McEwan, very famous writer. Entombment, Julian Barnes, again 2010 Booker Award winner, Irish Murdoch. They all are very famous contemporary writers. The right answer here is Anthony Burgess. Anthony Burgess wrote so many works which are important for your examination. Like this work is actually written by him, and then it actually tells the story of Shakespeare's life. As I've mentioned, fact and fiction, they are merged together, and you'll find that is the case. When you read about Shakespeare, his sonnets, from 127 to 152, these sonnets were dedicated to a dark lady. She may be Lady Fitton, the prostitute that was there in London, but we are not sure who that lady was. Simply we call it as a dark lady. So it is believed that including an affair with a black prostitute named Fatima, who inspires the dark lady of the sonnets, as we see in Shakespeare. Now the title that you find, Nothing Like the Sun, it refers to the sonnet number 130. It's again very important for your CUET PG entrance examination. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. This is a line from sonnet number 130. Now there is another work that Burgess wrote, Abba Abba. It may sound you like ABBA, which is patriarchal sonnet का जो octave होता है उसकी rhyming scene होती है, but the name is Abba Abba, and it is in two parts. One part that is important for us is about, it is related to the life of John Keats, the last month when he was suffering with TB and all that. This work is related to John Keats. Same way he wrote A Dead Man in Deptford, and it is basically related to a life of the Christopher Marlowe, a very important university wit. So this person, this writer, has written not only about Shakespeare but also about Keats, also about Marlowe. Okay. Now another question: who wrote a short comedy with the title The Dark Lady of the Sonnets? As you know, Shakespeare wrote 154 sonnet, out of which 1 to 126 were dedicated to a person called Mr. W.H. 127 to 152, they were dedicated to a dark lady. And the work that we are talking about here, there's a short comedy based on that, The Dark Lady of the Sonnets. Is it John Milton, Dryden, G.B. Shaw, or Thomas Hardy? The right answer here is G.B. Shaw, George Bernard Shaw, and he wrote this work. And he is basically talking about he's intending to meet the dark lady, accidentally encounters Queen Elizabeth I, and then he attempts to persuade her to create a national theatre. आप जब मॉडर्न एरा में आओगे तो आपको पता चलेगा कि शेक्सपियर के लिए थिएटर बनाने की बहुत बात हुई थी, एंड स्पेशली देयर आर सो मेनी रीटेलिंग्स ऑफ शेक्सपियरियन वर्क फॉर दैट पर्टिकुलर पर्पस एज वेल. यू विल फाइंड वन वीडियो जो हमने एक सीरीज स्टार्ट की थी बीच में, हमारे चैनल के प्लेलिस्ट में जाके आपको मिल जाएगी. बिल्कुल जो पहली वीडियो है उसमें हमने इसके बारे में बात भी की है, जो रीटेलिंग्स है शेक्सपियर की उसके बारे में बात भी की है, तो वहां पे जाके आप उस वीडियो को देख सकते हैं. तो एक कैंपेन चलाया गया था शेक्सपियर नेशनल थिएटर के लिए 1916 में, और कई सारे वर्क्स जो हैं, कई सारी शेक्सपियर की रीटेलिंग्स हुई थी इसी प्रोजेक्ट के अंडर में. ठीक है, ओके. नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन: which of the following best describes bardolatry? Bard, Shakespeare was known as Bard of Even. Ben Jonson called him. And this term is bardolatry. What is bardolatry? The first option is the study of Shakespeare's life and work. Second, the adoration or idolization of William Shakespeare. C, a type of Shakespearean theatre popular in the 17th century. Or last option, a form of Elizabethan poetry associated with Shakespeare. The right answer here is again a term which is coined by G.B. Shaw. G.B. Shaw wrote 3 plays for Puritans, and there is a preface that is attached to it, and in the preface he coined this term bardolatry, which is about the adoration or idolization of William Shakespeare. So bardolatry simply means excessive admiration of William Shakespeare, and that's why, as you know, Shakespeare was known as is very famous as the bard. So when you idolize someone who is bard, you may be called as bardolators. This is a term which is coined by G.B. Shaw. He these three plays for Puritans. They are basically the Devil's Disciple, Caesar and Cleopatra, Captain Brassbound's Conversation. These are known as 3 plays for Puritans. The last question for today is, which of the following is not a problem play by Shakespeare? You read about problem play when you read people like G.B. Shaw, Galsworthy. So basically in the Victorian era, people were writing problem plays. This is problem plays by Shakespeare. There's another person, and he, in a way arranged some of the Shakespearean works, basically 3 works, and he called them as problem plays of Shakespeare, talking about the contemporary issues which were there in the society. The options were All's Well That Ends Well, Measure for Measure, Troilus and Cressida, and The Tempest. This is a question from 2020 IFLU entrance examination. Right answer would be The Tempest. All the 3 plays that are written here, they are example of problems plays by Shakespeare. There is one writer, critic called F.S. Bose, and he wrote this work called Shakespeare and His Predecessors. He wrote it down in 1896, as you can see, and he talked about 3 plays by Shakespeare whom we may arrange at problem play, like All's Well That Ends Well, Measure for Measure, and Troilus and Cressida. So these were known as problem plays by Shakespeare. Problem plays were basically popularized by a Norwegian writer, Henrik Ibsen. Doll's House is very famous writing written by Henrik Ibsen. So this is all about today's video. Thank you so much, and if you haven't subscribed the channel, please do that.